The hum of the airplane's engines was almost soothing. The gentle vibration of the cabin felt like a lullaby as passengers settled into their seats for the long flight. Keanu Reeves, hidden behind a pair of aviator sunglasses and a well-worn hoodie, leaned back in his seat. The flight was supposed to be a peaceful break from the chaotic world of flashing cameras and red carpets. All he wanted was to quietly make his way to the other side of the country, unnoticed, uninterrupted. But of course peace never lasts long for someone like him. "Hey, you know who you look like?" The voice broke the silence, a little too loud, for Keanu's liking. He opened one eye from behind his shades, only to be met with a young man sitting beside him, grinning like he'd just solved the world's greatest mystery. Keanu sighed inwardly, his instincts telling him to stay quiet, to let it pass. But the man was persistent, leaning forward as if the conversation was a matter of life and death. "You look like Keanu Reeves," the guy continued, his voice full of exaggerated curiosity. "But that's probably just a coincidence, right? I mean, no way you could be him, right?" Keanu's hand subconsciously tightened around the armrest. He didn't want this. He didn't want to be recognized. Not today. But there was no getting away from it now. The man, let's call him Alex, wasn't going to drop it. "I mean, it's kind of funny," Alex went on, oblivious to the subtle discomfort in Keanu's posture. "Keanu Reeves is this big-time movie star, always playing those badass roles, but, I think he's kind of overrated. I never really got the whole appeal. Sure, The Matrix was cool, but, He trailed off, as if waiting for a reaction. Keanu stayed still, calm, his mind racing. Just ignore him, he told himself, but it wasn't that easy. Alex wasn't giving up. He continued now with an almost mocking tone. "You even look like him. Same hair, same face. Honestly, I don't even know how people get so famous for doing the same thing over and over." Keanu glanced at Alex, a flicker of amusement crossing his features. He could feel the familiar weight of judgment from someone who had no idea who he really was. It wasn't the first time he'd been mistaken for a regular guy, or even ridiculed for his roles. But today he just wanted to blend in, to enjoy the flight in peace. But Alex wasn't letting him off the hook. "What do you think? You ever get annoyed with people constantly telling you that you look like a celebrity, or do you just go along with it?" He laughed, thinking he was the only one who saw the humor in the situation. Keanu's mind was spinning. There was no way to, escape this, not now. His heart rate remained steady, a professional at keeping his cool in situations like these. But something gnawed at him, a quiet frustration he couldn't quite shake. Maybe it was the sheer persistence of Alex, or maybe it was the fact that the young man had no idea who he was talking to. The anonymity he craved was slipping away, bit by bit, with every word that came out of Alex's mouth. Still, he didn't respond. It was easier to just stay quiet. But there was one thing that stood out, something that Alex said that caught his attention. "I swear if I were a movie star, I'd at least want to be known for something good, not just, shooting a bunch of bad guys for 2 hours. He chuckled to himself, as if that was the punchline of a joke only he found funny. "So I mean, no offense, but I'd rather not get stuck in roles like that." Keanu exhaled slowly, his gaze settling on the window, trying to block out the noise. "Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from," he imagined saying. Aloud, though, he didn't. He wasn't a YouTuber, not today. Instead, he simply waited, hoping Alex would tire of the conversation and move on. But as the minutes passed, Keanu began to realize that Alex wasn't going to let this go. He wanted a reaction. He wanted to hear Keanu's voice, to see him. Crack! He wanted to be the one who had the last laugh. And Keanu couldn't help but wonder how long it would take before Alex realized that he had been talking to the very man he was mocking. Keanu Reeves wasn't one to make a scene. He'd spent most of his career learning how to maintain a calm demeanor, even when life threw its weirdest curveballs at him. The whole Hollywood star thing. He'd never quite gotten used to it. In fact, he often preferred the quiet, almost ordinary life that most people wouldn't think twice about. He enjoyed moments like this, sitting on a plane, away from the paparazzi, away from the flashing lights, just another passenger on a journey to somewhere else. But of course there was Alex. Alex didn't seem to have the same desire for peace. He was loud, a bit too confident, and always seemed to have something to say, even if it wasn't necessary. His round glasses sat just slightly askew on his nose, and his slightly unkempt hair matched the way he carried himself, like a man who didn't care much about the little things. He was in his late 20s, perhaps early 30s, dressed in a hoodie and jeans. Nothing special, nothing that would stand out in a crowd. But he had that air about him, the kind of person who liked to make sure his opinions were heard. He leaned back in his seat, arms crossed over his chest, as if waiting for Keanu to give him some sort of validation for his thoughts on the actor's career. Keanu glanced over again. Alex was staring at him, no longer pretending to be unaware of who he was talking to. The young man was smirking, clearly feeling proud of himself for having recognized someone famous, though Keanu thought he'd gotten the details wrong. He was making all the wrong assumptions, and it didn't seem like he was stopping any time soon. Alex continued, his voice almost too eager now. You know, I've always thought Hollywood's full of these cookie-cutter actors who just play the same role over and over. But you seem different, a little more reserved, I guess. Like you're not really into the whole fame thing. Is that how it is? Keanu looked over, his eyes just barely peeking from under the rim of his sunglasses. I guess you could say that. Alex leaned in, sensing a moment of vulnerability. Well, what about The Matrix? Wasn't that like the movie that really put you on the map? He chuckled. I mean, people still talk about it all the time, but that was, what, over 20 years ago? What have you been doing since then? Just living the quiet life. Keanu's fingers drummed lightly on the armrest. He didn't want to get into this conversation. He wasn't interested in rehashing his career or explaining himself to someone who couldn't even recognize him for who he truly was. Alex, however, was persistent. He continued to talk, oblivious to how uncomfortable he was making Keanu. It's crazy, man. All these people think they know you from your movies, but they don't really know you, right? Alex smirked as if he'd just uncovered some universal truth. I mean, I get it. You're probably tired of people asking for autographs or whatever, but I bet that's just part of the job. You gotta deal with it, right? Keanu's patience was starting to wear thin. He felt the old familiar tension rising in his chest, the frustration that came with the constant misunderstanding. But instead of responding, he just nodded. If Alex wanted to keep talking, that was fine. Let him think whatever he wanted. Let him have his moment. But the more Alex talked, the more Keanu realized something. There was something about the young man that made him stand out from the usual crowd of star-struck fans. Alex wasn't just a fan. He was someone who wanted to feel superior. He wanted to be the one who cracked the joke, who pointed out how much of a regular guy Keanu was. And in a strange way, that felt a little personal. Keanu glanced down at his lap for a moment, collecting his thoughts. He wasn't angry, not really, but the situation was starting to feel absurd. Here he was, just trying to get through a flight. And yet the man beside him was determined to make this about anything but the quiet existence Keanu craved. Still, Keanu said nothing. He let Alex continue, his words washing over him like white noise. For a moment he allowed himself to zone out, focusing on the rhythmic hum of the airplane engines instead of the constant stream of unwelcome words from his seatmate. And then, it happened. Alex, with a look of sudden realization, leaned even closer to Keanu, now speaking in an almost conspiratorial tone. You know, it's actually kind of funny, Alex said, his voice lowering as if they were sharing some secret. You look so much like him, like it's uncanny. But I gotta admit, I wasn't sure at first. You don't really feel like a celebrity. I mean, you're just sitting here like anyone else. Keanu could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the weight of the situation finally hitting him. Alex was getting closer to the truth, unknowingly digging himself into a deeper hole. The question lingered in the air, a heavy pause that felt like the calm before a storm. What would happen when Alex finally figured it out? Alex, oblivious to the silence that had suddenly fallen between them, seemed to take Keanu's silence as an invitation to continue his rambling monologue. He leaned back in his seat, settling in for what he clearly expected to be a long, one-sided conversation. I'm telling you, Alex said, his voice a little too loud for the cramped space of the airplane cabin. "I think it's a little weird how people can be so obsessed with movie stars. Like, yeah, you make some cool movies, but there's no way you're just sitting around waiting for fans to come up to you and tell you how great you are. It's got to get old, right? All the attention, the interviews, the endless photos of you looking perfect while you're just trying to live your life." Keanu's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to this kind of conversation, the kind where the person across from him felt comfortable talking about him as if he wasn't even there, as if he were some abstract idea of a celebrity rather than a real person sitting right in front of him. It didn't sit right, but Keanu kept his composure, his gaze fixed out the window. "What I mean is," Alex continued, the wheels of his brain spinning faster now, "is that it's got to be so much more real to be a normal guy. Don't you think? I mean, look at me, for instance." He gestured toward himself. "I'm just living my life, minding my own business, no cameras, no press, no one cares what I do. And honestly, I wouldn't want it any other way." Keanu barely held back a chuckle. "Does he think I want this?" he thought. "Does he think I chose this life for the glory?" It wasn't that Keanu minded fame, it came with the job. It wasn't even the attention that bothered him. It was the way people assumed they knew him, how they reduced him to a character, rather than the person behind the screen. He had spent years cultivating a life of peace, of solitude, but it seemed like it was impossible to escape the noise. And right now, in the middle of this plane ride, the noise was especially loud. Alex, now feeling bolder as he noticed Keanu's lack of reaction, pressed on, "But hey, let's be real here. How many times have you been mistaken for someone else? I bet it happens all the time, right? People like me come up to you and start babbling like they know you, and it's just awkward, isn't it?" Keanu remained silent, his gaze still fixed on the window. The image of the clouds passing by outside blurred as his mind wandered. He wasn't sure how much longer he could just sit there and take it. But then Alex said something that made Keanu's breath catch in his throat. "You know, I've never really understood the hype about you anyway," Alex continued. "I mean, I get it. You were in some big movies back in the day, but come on, it's like you're just stuck in those roles doing the same thing over and over. People act like you're this deep, mysterious guy, but really, you're just a guy who happens to look cool while kicking butt in slow motion." Keanu's grip on the armrest tightened. The words weren't even aimed at him personally. In fact, Alex probably didn't even realize who he was talking to, didn't know that he was sitting right next to the man he was criticizing. But something in those words, in the casual dismissal of his career, triggered a feeling deep inside Keanu. It wasn't just the criticizing, it was the assumption that he was nothing more than the roles he'd played. "Man, I don't know," Alex said, glancing sideways at Keanu, as if expecting him to chime in with some grand confession. "Maybe I'm just tired of people like you know, with all your movie star glam. If I were in your shoes, I'd want to just blend in with everyone else." The tension in Keanu's chest was palpable now. He could feel the familiar ache of frustration beginning to take hold. He didn't want to be the center of attention. He didn't want to be recognized. But here he was, being forced into a conversation that he didn't want to be part of. The weight of it all pressed down on him, and it took every ounce of restraint to keep from snapping. Just then, something shifted in the air, like a sudden gust of wind changing direction. Alex looked Keanu up and down, then did a double take. His eyes narrowed slightly, his mind clearly running through the possibilities. He leaned forward a little more, squinting at Keanu's face, as if something was beginning to dawn on him. "You know," Alex muttered slowly, almost to himself, "you really do look a lot like Keanu Reeves. But there's no way, right?" Keanu's heart skipped a beat. "It's happening," he thought. "He's going to figure it out," Alex continued, almost in disbelief. "But then again, I guess you could actually be him, right? Now, I'm just imagining things. I've seen you in movies, but I don't think you'd be sitting here on this flight, just being normal like this. You know what I mean?" Keanu's lips tightened into a thin line, the anger simmering beneath the surface. It wasn't that he hated the conversation. It was that Alex had no idea who he was talking to. There was a weird discomfort in being seen as nothing more than a character, a superficial projection of who people thought he was. Alex, now caught in his own spiral of doubt, glanced nervously at Keanu, suddenly realizing that maybe, just maybe, he had been talking too much. Keanu turned his head slowly to face Alex, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a warm smile, it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile that said, "You've been talking to the wrong guy, my friend." For a moment, Alex froze as if the reality of the situation was finally hitting him. His eyes widened in recognition, and just like that, the tide had turned. Alex's confident smirk faltered, and the tension in the air grew even thicker. The air between them was thick with tension, like a moment frozen in time, hanging by a delicate thread. Keanu's eyes never left Alex, who had suddenly gone quiet. There was no more mocking grin, no more confident posture. Alex's face shifted between confusion and realization as the pieces started falling into place. Keanu didn't say a word. He simply sat there watching Alex process what was happening. His mind was racing too, but not in the way you'd expect. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even upset. He just felt bemused, oddly detached from the situation. This was the exact kind of interaction he had tried so hard to avoid, yet here it was, unfolding right in front of him in the most inconvenient way possible. Alex's eyes flickered nervously, darting from Keanu's face to the seat back in front of him. It was as though he was trying to convince himself that what he was seeing wasn't real, that the man beside him couldn't possibly be the very actor he had spent the last 20 minutes insulting. "No," Alex muttered to himself, shaking his head slowly. "No way. There's no way you're actually him." Keanu raised an eyebrow, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. But still he said nothing. The silence between them grew heavier. It wasn't uncomfortable, though. It was almost as if the air had been sucked out of the cabin and all the noise in the world had been muffled. Leaving just the two of them in this strange standoff, Alex's face turned beet red, a deep flush spreading across his cheeks. He shifted in his seat, clearly regretting every word he had just spoken. His earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced with a mixture of embarrassment and awe. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. It was as if he couldn't find the words to fix what he had just done. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Alex cleared his throat. I'm sorry," he stammered. I didn't know it was actually you. I thought I was just talking to some guy who looked like you." Keanu didn't respond immediately. He could feel the weight of Alex's apology, but he wasn't going to make it easy for him. He let the silence stretch just a little longer before speaking. "It's fine," Keanu said, his voice calm and unbothered. "It happens more than you think." His words were measured, almost as though he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head, even though he had never actually wanted to be in it. Alex's eyes widened as he tried to gauge the situation. "It happens more than I think," he echoed, still struggling to piece everything together. "Wait, so you're really Keanu Reeves? Like the Keanu Reeves?" Keanu didn't flinch. "Yeah," he said simply, almost too casually, as if it was just another ordinary fact. "That's me." The realization hit Alex like a freight train. His mouth opened and closed as if he was trying to find a way to form a coherent sentence. I can't believe it," he stammered, running a hand through his hair, his voice now laced with genuine shock. I've been saying all that stuff, and here you are sitting right next to me. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean any of it. I was just trying to make a point, you know?" Keanu nodded slowly, still calm. "I get it. It's not the first time something like this has happened." He felt oddly at ease. There was something almost therapeutic about letting Alex stumble through his apologies. It wasn't the first time someone had made assumptions about him, about his career, and it wouldn't be the last. But somehow, this time felt different. There was no anger, no frustration, just a sort of detached amusement. It was almost as if this was just part of the endless cycle he had learned to accept. "I'm serious," Alex continued, his voice rising with panic now. I thought you were just some guy who looked like you, but now I feel like such an idiot. I've been going on and on about how overrated you are, how you're just doing the same thing over and over, and oh God, you must think I'm a total jerk." Keanu's lips twitched, as if he was about to laugh, but he stopped himself. He could tell Alex was genuinely mortified. He'd heard the same kind of things a million times before. People felt the need to belittle what they didn't understand. It wasn't personal. It wasn't about him. Not really. But Alex wasn't done yet. He seemed determined to redeem himself, and in his nervousness he stumbled over his words even more. Listen, I didn't mean to insult you. It's just, you know, the whole thing with Hollywood and celebrities, it just feels fake sometimes, you know? Like all the people who are famous for nothing or for just looking cool on screen. But I didn't mean you're different. I mean, come on. The way you carry yourself, it's nothing like what I was saying. I respect. You really? Keanu sat back, folding his arms. It's all right, he said, his voice steady but not unkind. You're entitled to your opinions. Alex gave a shaky laugh, but there was no humor in it. He could barely look Keanu in the eye now, clearly too embarrassed to face the man he had just spent the last half-hour mocking. He rubbed his hands together nervously. I don't even know what to say at this point. I feel like I've totally ruined this. Keanu shook his head slightly. You didn't ruin anything. You just learned something about me. And maybe about yourself, too. Alex blinked, looking genuinely confused. What do you mean? Keanu's eyes softened. We're all just people, he said, his voice quiet but firm. People make assumptions. They judge, and that's fine, everyone does it. But sometimes it's good to remember that we're all more than just what we do, or how we look, or the roles we play in life. Alex stared at him for a moment, processing Keanu's words. The tension in the air was starting to lift, replaced by something a little more grounded. Alex nodded slowly. Yeah, I get it. I'm sorry though, really. I should have known better, Keanu smiled, a warm but subtle smile. It's okay, really. And with that, for the first time during the entire flight, Keanu finally felt the shift he had been waiting for. A moment of calm, a small sense of relief. Alex had learned something today, and maybe, just maybe, Keanu had taught him something. Too, the plane had hit a pocket of turbulence, shaking slightly as it made its way over the mountains. But the real turbulence, the kind that had nothing to do with the weather, still swirled between Keanu and Alex. The awkwardness of the moment, the weight of what had been said, hung in the air like an uncomfortable cloud. But Alex was visibly trying to recover, hoping to steer the conversation to safer waters. All right, well, Alex began, clearing his throat. I mean, yeah, this is just so wild. I had no idea it was actually you, and here I am, running my mouth like I'm some kind of expert on your life. He chuckled nervously, but Keanu didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed, calm, as he looked out the window again. Alex felt a momentary pang of regret. It wasn't just the things he had said. It was the realization that Keanu had been sitting next to him all along, listening to his careless comments. How long had it taken him to figure out who he was? Was it immediate, or did he allow Alex to babble on in ignorance just to watch the realization hit? Keanu, though, wasn't angry. Alex could tell now. It wasn't the way Keanu usually interacted, with fans or the media. He wasn't pushing him away or brushing him off. It was something else entirely, a quiet understanding, a lesson in empathy Alex wasn't prepared for. The turbulence subsided, the seatbelt sign flickering off as the plane smoothed out. Alex, however, couldn't relax. He had been given a glimpse into Keanu's world, a world that wasn't just about action films, fame and awards, but about people, the real unspoken humanity behind all the public personas. Keanu shifted in his seat, turning slightly to face Alex. There was something about the calmness in his eyes, something unspoken, that made Alex feel smaller and smaller. It wasn't just about the apology. It was about something deeper, an unspoken connection, the realization that the man sitting next to him had seen it all. He had dealt with the worst of the media, the worst of people. And yet, here he was, not angry, but patient. He wasn't just a star. He was a person, just like everyone else. Alex opened his mouth to speak again, but this time his words caught in his throat. The idea of continuing to speak felt almost impossible. What more could he say? What could possibly make up for the disrespect, the judgments, the casual dismissals of Keanu's entire existence? Alex could feel the weight of his previous comments now, the way they had cut deeper than he'd ever intended. And it wasn't the first time he'd made assumptions. About someone, he knew that, but this was different. This wasn't just some random person, it was Keanu Reeves. Keanu, sensing Alex's discomfort, sighed softly. It wasn't a sigh of frustration, but a sigh of understanding. He knew what this moment was. He had been in Alex's shoes more than once, been the person who put their foot in their mouth and then spent hours trying to redeem themselves. "Look," Keanu finally said, his voice soft but grounded. "It's okay, I know how it is. People talk, they judge. They have opinions that don't always reflect reality. It's part of the job I have. But it's also part of life. You can't avoid it. Sometimes it's better to just let people see you for who you really are." Alex swallowed hard, the weight of Keanu's words landing heavily on his chest. He wanted to say something, anything to make things right, but all he could manage was a soft, "I'm really sorry." His voice cracked a little, and the sincerity behind it was undeniable. He felt the depth of his apology, not just for what he had said, but for the assumptions he had made about Keanu's life, the complexity of it, the humanity. Keanu nodded, as if he understood. "The thing is," he continued, his voice growing a little more earnest, "you don't have to be famous to be real, and you don't have to fit some mold for people to respect you. Everyone's just trying to get through the day, trying to figure it all out. Even me, even people you look up to." He paused, his gaze turning inward for a moment, before he looked back at Alex. "But it's all about how you treat others, man, and sometimes that's the only thing that makes a difference." For the first time, Alex felt a lump form in his throat. He wasn't sure what it was about Keanu's words that struck him so deeply, but they cut through the noise in his mind like a razor. They weren't just words of forgiveness. They were words of understanding, words that reminded him of the power of kindness, of giving people the benefit of the doubt. Alex turned his eyes down to his hands, his fingers fidgeting nervously with the sleeve of his jacket. He could feel his cheeks flush again, this time with a sense of humility. There was no need to fill the silence with more excuses or apologies. It wasn't about fixing everything. It was about accepting the moment, and accepting that sometimes the best thing you can do is simply learn from your mistakes. Keanu sat back in his seat, a slight smile on his face now, not the guarded one he had been wearing at the beginning, but a genuine, almost serene smile. It was like he had carried the weight of 100 conversations like this one, but instead of being worn down, it seemed to lift him. The truth was, Keanu had seen it all. He had heard it all. The mockery, the insults, the projections of who people thought he was. But he had also learned to see past it all, to the heart of things, to the realness of every situation. And that was the gift he had. "Listen," Keanu said after a pause, "no one's perfect, not even me. But I think you're getting there." Alex looked up at him, his mouth slightly agape. The man he had just spent an entire flight insulting was now offering him some of the most important advice he had ever received. The realization of what was happening, the lesson he was receiving, hit him harder than anything. He wasn't just sorry for what he had said to Keanu. He was grateful for this strange, unexpected moment of connection. For the first time in a long time, Alex felt like he was truly hearing something important. And in that moment he understood. It wasn't just about saying the right words, it was about realizing what kind of person you wanted to be, whether you chose to be kind, to listen, and to truly see the people around you. He let out a deep breath. "Thanks," he said, his voice steady now. "I mean it. Thanks for teaching me something today." Keanu nodded, a silent acknowledgement that Alex didn't need to say anything else. The plane had begun its descent, and the fasten seatbelt sign blinked on, filling the cabin with a sense of finality. The mood between Keanu and Alex had shifted dramatically, the earlier awkwardness replaced with a newfound respect. The turbulence they had experienced wasn't just from the weather, It had been a deep, emotional journey. But now, as the plane made its final approach to the destination, Alex felt a surprising sense of calm settle over him. He had learned something today, something that might just change how he looked at the world, and more importantly, how he interacted with the people in it. The man sitting next to him, a famous actor he had once ridiculed, had shown him what real humility looked like. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was quiet, grounded, and filled with understanding. Keanu had not only forgiven him, but had also taken the time to offer something he didn't have to: wisdom, kindness, a reflection of his own experiences. Alex glanced at Keanu, who was staring out the window, his gaze steady. There was no arrogance in his demeanor, no air of superiority. Keanu looked like someone who had seen it all, good and bad, but had learned to find balance in between. Keanu turned to him, catching his eye. "You doing all right?" he asked, his voice soft. Alex nodded, feeling the weight of the day lift off his shoulders. "Yeah, more than all right, actually," he said, his voice sincere. I think I've learned a lot more than I expected." Keanu smiled, the warmth returning to his expression. "Life has a funny way of doing that. You never know what you're going to take away from a conversation or a mistake." Alex chuckled lightly, his fingers tapping nervously on the armrest. "I guess I've learned not to judge a book by its cover, especially when the cover is, Keanu Reeves." Keanu's eyes twinkled with amusement, and for the first time since they had started talking, Alex saw the playful side of him. "Well, I'd hope so. You'd be surprised how often I get mistaken for other people, sometimes even other famous people, so you're not the first." Alex raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Really? Who?" Keanu shrugged, the lightness in his posture belying the deeper tone of their earlier conversation. "A lot of people think I'm someone else. Some people even think I'm a stunt double, or a guy who just looks like me. It happens a lot, but it's kind of funny. People have their own version of who I am, and usually it has nothing to do with who I really am." Alex let out a short laugh. "I get it. I guess I kind of made that mistake today." "It's all right," Keanu said with a soft grin. "We all do it." The flight attendants began their final round, securing the cabin for landing. As Alex buckled his seatbelt, he looked over at Keanu, who had returned his gaze to the window, seemingly lost in thought. But there was something different in the way he carried himself now, a quiet strength, an unspoken confidence that didn't need to be flaunted. It was the kind of person Alex realized he could learn from. The plane began its final descent into the airport, the runway visible just below, and with it came a realization. He hadn't just learned something about Keanu Reeves, he had learned something about himself. The moment the plane touched down and the wheels made contact with the tarmac, the cabin erupted with the familiar sounds of passengers unbuckling their seatbelts, collecting their belongings, and preparing to disembark. But for Alex, the world around him seemed to slow down. As the flight attendants moved down the aisles, collecting trash and ensuring the cabin was in order, he couldn't help but feel like he was carrying something important with him, something he hadn't expected when he first boarded the plane. Keanu was already gathering his things, his movements fluid and easy, as if the previous conversation had not been a wait at all. Alex, still processing everything, slowly stood up and reached for his bag. He glanced once more at the man who had, in such a short span of time, altered his perspective entirely. "Hey, Keanu," Alex said, surprising himself with how casual the words came out. He wasn't nervous anymore. He wasn't ashamed. There was no fear, just a sense of understanding. "I just wanted to say thanks. Really. I don't know what I expected today, but this has been a wake-up call." Keanu turned to him with that familiar, calm smile. "You're welcome. Just remember, we're all a little messy sometimes. The important thing is we learn from it. You seem like a good guy." Alex paused, feeling a warmth spread in his chest at Keanu's words. He didn't know if he deserved that acknowledgement, but it was there and he would carry it with him. As they began to exit the plane, Alex couldn't help but think about the layers of assumptions people made about others, especially famous figures. How often had he dismissed people without truly understanding them, without seeing them for who they really were? How many times had he treated someone as a stereotype, never considering the complexity of their reality? He was determined not to make that mistake again. The airport terminal was bustling with people, travelers making their way to baggage claim, others grabbing coffee before continuing their journeys. Keanu walked ahead, blending into the crowd, as if he were just another passenger on a flight, no different from anyone else. For a moment, Alex thought about calling out to him, but Keanu was already a few steps ahead, moving with the quiet grace that Alex had come to recognize in their short conversation. Before Keanu turned a corner and disappeared into the crowd, he paused, looked back at Alex and gave him a brief nod, a silent acknowledgement that said everything Alex needed to hear. "Take care," Keanu called out, his voice warm but steady. "You too," Alex replied, watching him disappear into the terminal. The weight of the encounter lingered with Alex as he stood there, thinking about all that had been said. The lessons, the humility, the realization that people were not always what they appeared to be, especially when it came to someone as famous as Keanu Reeves. And for Alex, the journey was only beginning. He knew he had a long way to go, but this chance meeting had given him a new perspective. It wasn't just about fame or the way the world saw people, it was about respect, kindness, and the way you chose to treat others, regardless of who they were or what they had achieved. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most important thing of all. The airport terminal hummed with the usual activity, the soft murmur of voices mingling with the sounds of rolling luggage and distant announcements. Alex lingered by the exit, still processing the unexpected turn his day had taken. He had boarded that flight with a preconception of Keanu Reeves, as most people did. He thought he knew what to expect. A man who was distant, reserved, maybe even unapproachable. But the Keanu he had met during the flight was nothing like that. He was humble, understanding, and most of all, real. As Alex walked toward baggage claim, the weight of the conversation with Keanu started to settle in, sinking deeper with each step. He had gone from mocking the actor's quiet demeanor to genuinely appreciating the complexity behind it. It was a reminder of how easy it was to judge someone without knowing their story, without understanding the pressures they faced. He had been a fan of Keanu's movies for years, but meeting him in person had shattered the image he had built in his mind. The actor was just a person who had endured his own struggles and had come out the other side with a level of grace Alex had never expected. Keanu's kindness wasn't just for show, it was part of who he was, and it had left a lasting impact on Alex. As he stood by the carousel waiting for his bag, he noticed a group of people walking past him, their eyes briefly locking with his. He didn't recognize them, but they gave him a knowing look. A few whispers passed between them, and Alex realized they had been talking about Keanu. They hadn't seen him at the airport. They didn't know he'd been on the same flight, but they had certainly heard about it. Keanu's presence always left an impression, whether it was through his movies or his quiet actions. It was strange to think that, just a few hours ago, Alex had been one of those people, judging and making assumptions, but now he felt like a different person, someone who was learning how to see beyond the surface, to understand that the truth about a person often lies beneath the public persona. His bag appeared on the conveyor belt, and Alex grabbed it, still, lost in thought. As he made his way out of the terminal, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, surprised to see a message from his friend Mark. "Mark, dude, did you just sit next to Keanu Reeves? I saw a post on Instagram. Is that real?" Alex smiled to himself, shaking his head. It wasn't every day that someone found themselves sitting next to a Hollywood legend. He could have lied, played it cool, and told Mark it was just a normal flight. "But that wouldn't be true, would it, Alex?" "Yeah, it was him. Long story. But honestly, I've learned more from him in one flight than I have from some of my closest friends in years." He hit send, feeling a sense of vulnerability in admitting that to Mark. But it was true. He wasn't just learning about Keanu. He was learning about himself. The response came quickly. "Mark, dude, that's deep. What happened?" Alex paused for a moment, considering how to explain everything without making it sound too surreal. It was a story that was difficult to put into words, how a simple flight had turned into a life lesson. But Mark was a good friend, and if anyone would understand, it was him. Alex. I kind of messed up at first. I was making fun of him, not even realizing it was actually him. But then I found out, and he handled it like a champ. He wasn't mad, just real chill about it. We talked for a while, and he taught me something about how people treat others, and not jumping to conclusions. It was, unexpected. Mark. That's insane. You know, I always heard he was a nice guy, but you never really know. That's amazing. Sounds like a moment of a lifetime. Alex leaned against a pillar near the exit, looking out at the parking lot. It was a moment of a lifetime, one he would probably never forget. He wasn't just walking away with a cool story. He was walking away with a piece of wisdom that would stay with him long after this day. But as he walked to his car, another thought crept into his mind. Was this an isolated incident? Would Alex go back to his old ways, slipping back into the cycle of judgment and assumptions? Or had this conversation with Keanu really changed something in him? He knew the answer wasn't clear-cut. Change took time. But he also knew that today he had taken the first step. A week passed, and Alex couldn't stop thinking about that flight. Every time he went to pick up his phone, he remembered Keanu's words, how everyone had their own version of who he was, and how easy it was to misunderstand someone based on surface-level observations. He was walking down the street one afternoon when he bumped into an old acquaintance, Marcus, someone he hadn't seen in years. Marcus was always a bit of a show-off, quick to name-drop celebrities and talk about his connections in the entertainment industry. Most of the time, Alex didn't pay him much attention. He had always found Marcus a bit insufferable, and their interactions had been limited to casual run-ins. "Hey, man." Marcus greeted him a bit too enthusiastically. "What's up? You're looking good. Been a while." "Yeah, it's been a minute," Alex replied, his mind still somewhat distracted. But then Marcus dropped something that caught his attention. So no," Marcus continued, "I was just hanging out with some friends at this private event last night. And man, we were talking about Keanu Reeves. That guy is so overrated. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's talented. But everyone acts like he's some kind of saint. I bet it's all for show." Alex blinked, and a familiar feeling stirred in him, a feeling that had begun to feel like instinct now. He could feel the judgment coming from Marcus, and for the first time, Alex didn't just sit back and let it slide. He found himself standing up for Keanu, even though it was just an offhand comment. "You don't know that," Alex said, his voice firm. "I mean, honestly, you can't judge a person like that just based on what you hear. I had a chance to talk to him recently, and the guy's the real deal. Not what you think." Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the shift in Alex's tone. "Wait, you talked to Keanu Reeves?" "Yeah, I did," Alex replied, his voice steady. "And if you really knew him, you'd understand what I mean. Don't just buy into the narrative that everyone else sells. People are more than that." For a moment, Marcus was quiet, taken aback by Alex's response. He wasn't used to Alex standing up for something or someone like this. As they continued talking, Alex felt a strange sense of empowerment. He wasn't just defending Keanu. He was defending the idea that people, all people, deserved to be seen for who they really were, not who the world expected them to be. The next few days after Alex's conversation with Marcus felt different. There was a weight in his step, a new awareness, and an inclination to think before reacting. The flight with Keanu Reeves had sparked something in him that he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just a story about meeting a celebrity. It was a reflection on how he saw the world, and more importantly, how he engaged with the people in it. He was more patient with his co-workers, listening with genuine interest rather than offering quick judgments or assumptions. He found himself sparking deeper conversations, ones that went beyond small talk or surface-level pleasantries. In fact, he had even stopped himself from immediately dismissing certain ideas at work, giving others a chance to present their views before quickly jumping to conclusions. But the changes didn't stop there. One evening, as Alex sat in a local cafe sipping his coffee, he overheard a conversation at the table next to him that immediately caught his attention. Two women were talking animatedly about a recent viral video. "I just can't stand how fake people are, especially these celebrities," one woman said. "Like, I get it. They need to have this perfect image for their fans, but it's so obvious when they're putting on a show. They just care about the fame." Alex couldn't help but lean in slightly, instinctively, even though he wasn't part of the conversation. It reminded him of how he used to think, the quick dismissals, the judgment that stemmed from nothing more than assumptions. "That's true," the other woman agreed, shaking her head. "Like Keanu Reeves. I mean, he seems nice, but do we really know him? It could all just be an act." Alex felt a tightening in his chest, but this time he didn't feel the frustration that might have come in the past. Instead, he stood up, grabbing his bag and preparing to leave. He walked to the counter and ordered another coffee, taking a deep breath to calm himself. Then something unusual happened. He heard a familiar voice. "Alex?" He turned to see a woman he recognized from his office, Sophie, standing near the counter with a kind smile. Sophie was one of the more quiet and thoughtful people in his workplace. They'd had a few casual conversations before, but nothing too deep. "Hey, Sophie," Alex said, surprised to see her there. "Mind if I join?" "You for a second?" she asked, her tone warm and inviting. Alex gestured to the chair across from him and Sophie sat down. "I heard you over there earlier, with the conversation about Keanu," Sophie said, glancing over at the two women who were still engaged in their discussion. "I've noticed you've seemed different lately, a bit more reflective, more open." Alex smiled slightly, unsure of how to answer. "Yeah, it's been a weird couple of days. I had this crazy experience with Keanu on a flight a few days ago. Honestly, I wasn't expecting it to impact me this much." Sophie raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "A flight with Keanu Reeves? What happened?" Alex sat back, shaking his head in disbelief at how surreal it all sounded now. "It's hard to explain, but I went from thinking he was just another celebrity, someone who probably puts up a wall with everyone, to realizing that he's not like that at all. He's real, humble. It was like meeting a totally different person than the one I thought I knew." Sophie leaned forward slightly, her eyes focused. "Wow, that's pretty deep. It's interesting, isn't it? How we all have this image of who people are based on what we see from the outside. It's like we don't even give them the chance to show us who they really are." Alex nodded, the realization settling deeper in him. "Exactly. That's what I've been thinking about. I've spent so much time judging people, especially celebrities, without really understanding them. But after meeting Keanu, I've learned that the surface-level stuff is just that. Surface. There's always so much more going on underneath." Sophie smiled knowingly. "I think we could all use a little more of that perspective. It's easy to think we know someone based on their public persona or what we see online, but we have no idea what their real life is like, what challenges they face. We could all stand to stop assuming and start listening." The conversation with Sophie felt like a quiet confirmation of everything Alex had been learning. It wasn't just about Keanu. It was about seeing others fully, embracing their complexity, and not jumping to conclusions based on stereotypes or assumptions. As they chatted, the two women at the next table continued to talk, their voices rising in volume as they debated the nature of fame. Alex's mind wandered back to the conversation. He thought about how easy it had been, once upon a time, to dismiss people like Keanu because of their fame. But now he could see the flaws in that thinking. "Look, I'm not saying Keanu's perfect, because no one is," Alex said to Sophie. "But I've learned that people deserve more than just a surface judgment. We're all human, and sometimes the people we admire or criticize have their own lives, their own struggles. We can't see all of it from the outside." Sophie nodded. "That's the truth. And you know, I think that's something a lot of people miss in this day and age, especially with social media. It's so easy to forget that what we see online is often just a highlight reel, not the full picture." Alex leaned back in his chair, taking a sip of his coffee. For the first time in a while, he felt truly content, as if he had unlocked a new level of understanding. It was almost like the fog had lifted, and he could finally see things for what they truly were. People were more than just the labels society placed on them. They were complicated, nuanced, and worthy of respect, not for what they appeared to be, but for who they were. Weeks passed, and Alex's life began to feel like a series of interconnected moments that all led back to that one fateful flight. He found himself engaging with people more meaningfully, approaching conversations with a renewed sense of curiosity and empathy. He was no longer the person who assumed he knew everything about someone based on their status or appearance. At work, his relationships with colleagues had shifted. He was less quick to judge and more willing to listen. Even when challenges arose, he found himself focusing on solutions rather than problems, understanding that every issue had layers beneath it, just like every person. But it wasn't just about his professional life. Alex had started reconnecting with friends, old and new, in a more authentic way. He didn't have all the answers, but he was asking the right questions, the ones that dug deeper than the surface level. And when he spoke to people, whether it was a stranger in the cafe or an old friend, he saw them differently. He saw the layers of their lives, the struggles, the triumphs, and the humanity they carried with them. One evening, as Alex was leaving work, he received a text message from Mark. "Mark, hey man, you know, after what you said about Keanu, I've been thinking a lot about my own assumptions about people. I'm trying to stop judging others so quickly. It's not easy, but I feel like I'm starting to see people differently, so thanks for that." Alex smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about his growth, it was about how that growth had rippled out to others. The lessons he had learned from a simple encounter had spread, changing the way he interacted with the world and the way others interacted with him. He sat back in his chair for a moment, reflecting on how much had changed. The flight with Keanu had been the catalyst for a shift in his life, and as he looked ahead, he realized that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where empathy, understanding, and true connection were the guiding principles. After, or sometimes the most unexpected encounters could teach us the greatest lessons. The days seemed to fly by after the conversation with Sophie, and Alex found himself reflecting more often on his life, his choices, and his interactions with others. Every time he met someone new, he found himself listening more intently, trying to see beyond their words and actions to understand who they truly were. It was as if Keanu's influence had awakened something in him, a part of himself that had been dormant, his ability to appreciate people for who they really were, not just for the personas they put on. It was a chilly Saturday afternoon when Alex sat at a park bench, watching the leaves swirl around in the autumn breeze. He had taken the day off to clear his mind, to reflect on the changes in his life. His phone buzzed in his pocket and he pulled it out, smiling when he saw a text from his old college buddy, Ryan. "Ryan. Hey man, long time no talk. How have you been?" Alex smiled, his fingers flying over the keys as he responded. "Alex. Doing great, just been thinking a lot lately. How about you?" The reply came quickly. "Ryan. I've been good. Funny thing is, I've been trying to catch up on some of those old movies we used to watch in college. Remember how we always used to talk about Keanu Reeves?" Alex felt his heart skip a beat. It wasn't every day that someone brought up Keanu out of the blue, especially in the way Ryan did. The memories of their late-night conversations came rushing back. They'd bonded over Keanu's iconic roles in movies like The Matrix. And John Wick, always joking about how cool he was. "Alex. Yeah, I remember. Funny you mention him. I actually met him a few weeks ago on a flight." Ryan's reply was instantaneous. "Ryan. No way. What happened?" Alex chuckled, taking a deep breath as he began to type. He wasn't sure how to sum up everything that had changed in his life, but he knew he had to start somewhere. "Alex. It was wild, man. I was on this flight, and I had no idea it was him at first. I was making all these assumptions, mocking him without even knowing it was him. But then I realized who he was, and we ended up talking. He's nothing like what I expected. Super humble, down to earth. He actually taught me a lot about how easy it is to judge people without really understanding them." Ryan's response came almost immediately. "Ryan, that's insane. I've heard people say he's a really nice guy, but wow, it sounds like that really made an impact on you." "Alex, it did. It was like a wake-up call. I realized how much I'd been doing that with everyone, judging people based on what I thought I knew about them. It sounds so basic, but it really hit me. Sometimes, the things we think we know about others are just surface-level stuff. There's so much more going on beneath the surface. Ryan didn't text back immediately, but Alex could almost picture him sitting there, processing what he'd just read. After a few moments, Ryan's message came through. Ryan, I get it. I've been guilty of doing that too. People can be so quick to write others off, especially celebrities. It's like we think we have them all figured out because of the media or what we see online. Alex, exactly. But after meeting Keanu, I learned that there's always more to the story. It's like everyone has their own narrative, and we don't get to decide what that is based on a single moment or a headline. Ryan's response was thoughtful. Ryan, man, that's powerful. Maybe we could all benefit from taking a step back and thinking before we judge. I guess I should probably stop assuming that just because a celebrity's in the limelight, they're not struggling like the rest of us. Alex. Yeah, exactly. The more I think about it, the more I realize that it's not just celebrities, it's everyone. We all have our own battles, even if they're not always visible. Keanu just reminded me of that in a way I didn't expect. Alex sat back, the weight of the conversation settling in. He had never expected to have this kind of exchange with Ryan. After all, they had always been the kind of friends who joked around, never getting too deep. But something had shifted within Alex, and now he found himself having deeper, more meaningful conversations with people he never would have expected. After a few moments, Ryan sent another message. Ryan, thanks for sharing that with me, man. It's like a light bulb went off. I'll have to think about how I treat people more moving forward. Alex, any time, man. It feels good to know it's not just me thinking about this. Hope it helps. As he put his phone back in his pocket, Alex felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in a while. It was clear now that the lesson Keanu had inadvertently taught him was spreading beyond just himself. People were starting to see through the surface-level judgments they had made about others. And the more people embraced that understanding, the better the world would be. Later that evening, Alex sat on his couch, his mind still buzzing with the thoughts from the day. He felt more connected to the world, more understanding of the complexities of people, even those he had once thought he understood completely. He had learned that everyone had their own story, their own struggles, and that it was important to listen before making judgments. He had learned that empathy was the key to truly knowing someone. His phone buzzed again, and he pulled it out to see a notification. Keanu Reeves just posted on Instagram. Without hesitation, Alex tapped on the notification. The post was simple, as our set photo of a sunset, with a caption that read, "Sometimes the hardest thing to do is the easiest. Just listen." Alex smiled softly to himself. It was a small message, but it meant everything. Keanu's impact on him had been profound, and now, even in the smallest of ways, Keanu was still teaching him. For Alex, this was just the beginning of a journey that was about seeing people differently, understanding them as they truly were, not just as they appeared. And with every conversation, every moment, every connection, Alex knew he was growing. The world around him was more complex than he had ever imagined, and he was eager to keep learning. As the days went by, Alex continued to embrace the lessons he had learned. His interactions with people became more genuine, more compassionate. He had learned the power of seeing people for who they truly were, and the effect it had on his own life was undeniable. He was no longer the person who judged based on surface-level assumptions. He had found something deeper, something that connected him to the world and to others in a way he hadn't known before. In the end, meeting Keanu Reeves on that flight had been a turning point, not just for Alex, but for everyone he shared his journey with. It wasn't about the fame, the Hollywood glitz, or the action-packed movies. It was about the heart behind the persona, and Alex would carry that lesson with him, wherever his life took him next. The end of one chapter marked the beginning of many more, each filled with the lessons of kindness, empathy, and understanding, and Alex was ready for all of them,